continue listening to God speak to us from the Gospel in the tradition of Luke.
Glory to you, Lord.
At that time, people were present who told Jesus about the Galileans whose blood Pilate had mixed with their sacrifices. Jesus said in reply, "Do you think that these Galileans were the greatest sinners in Galilee? All come to the same end unless you reform." Jesus spoke this parable. There was a fig tree growing up in the vineyard. The owner came out looking for fruit, but didn't find any. The owner said to the vine dresser, "Look here. For 3 years now I have come out and be blotted out."
Amen. Good morning.
Good morning.
We've often heard it said, that which does not kill us only makes us stronger. Well, I'm sure that the people that we hear about in the Gospels, those Galileans who gave their life so that Pilate could mix their blood with his sacrifice to some god, and the people who wound up in the wrong place at the wrong time when that tower fell, probably would say, yeah, that's a nice saying, but it doesn't apply to me because I'm dead. But we know in our lives that suffering is part of it, and that suffering can take many, many forms. It can take physical suffering. We have pain. We have a bad knee. We have to walk on a walker. We have some illness, whatever it may be. So suffering is part of life, and we have to deal with it. We have to know how to deal with it. So we take medication. I remember a friend of mine who was in the Brothers with me many, many years ago. I've known Michael for over 50 years. And when we were young, we talked about this, and we would talk about where we're going and how the vacation we took and our work and our play and all that stuff. Now we're talking about, oh, I take this medication. I got to see this doctor. I'm going here. I'm going there. And I said, Michael, when did we become old? It's like we went to bed young and we got up old. You know, it happens. And getting out of bed in the morning every day seems to be a little bit more harder. And that's why I have to have the chair with the arms so I can get up. Otherwise, I'll be here till next week and have You-Go Foods bring me something to eat. But anyway, but suffering is part of life. Suffering is part of this in the gospel. Now, what Jesus is saying is that, and there was in the time of Jesus this idea among the Jews that if you, but Job kept faithful to God. Job kept faithful to God. If we are able, as Tobit said, if we're able to accept good things from the Lord, can't we receive bad as well? And in all this, we have to remember that God is there. What Moses heard God say from the bush, what throughout the history of the Jewish people, in a variety of citations in the scriptures, God says to his people, you will be my people and I will be your God. That was the covenant he made with Abraham. That is the covenant that he signed on to, and the only ones who broke that covenant were the people of Israel, or us ourselves. And as I was preparing I couldn't help but think, we read about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, this God of the ancients. That's our God. That's our God. We are the people, we are connected with the Jews in the fact that we worship the same God. Maybe differently, but we worship the same God. Our God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. That goes back 4,000 or 5,000 years. So in our suffering, God is present to us. God is present to us in all our sufferings. I will be your people. You will be my people, and I will be your God. We have to remember that. Remember what God said to Moses, I have heard my people suffering in the land of Egypt, and I am sending you to them to deliver them. God hears our suffering. God knows our suffering, and God is present to us in our suffering. Viktor Frankl, who spent 1 year in a concentration camp, he was, I don't know, lucky enough, but his whole family was destroyed in a concentration camp. He wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning, and he was in the last year of the war. His camp was liberated by the Allies, and he was set free. And in his musing on what took place, and he talks about suffering. He says, in a very interesting way, and you have to think about this as I'm reading it to you. Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So what he is saying is, suffering is part of life. We all suffer. It could be physical suffering, psychological suffering. It could come from families. It could come from friends. It could come from our health, wherever it's coming. But suffering is part of life, and we have to take that as a given. That's the reality. Now, how we respond to that suffering is our freedom. We can fight it. We can cry. We can carry on. It doesn't change the reality of our suffering. Or we can face it with freedom and do our best to overcome our suffering, overcome that situation. And that's our choice. That's our choice. As many of you know, many years ago I was diagnosed with cancer. And when I heard the news, I remember standing at the sink looking at the back window, and I said, am I going to live long enough to eat the food that I just bought and put away? And I began, this struggle. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote the 5 stages of grief, and part of that is denial, then, bargaining and acceptance and all that. So I remember driving many times driving to where I had to go for my work and having an argument with myself. Why me? Why do I have kids? I'm a good person. I'm a priest. I help people. I work for hospice. I bring people to God. I hear their problems. Why me? And the other part of me would say, why not you? What makes you different from all the rest of humanity who suffer from the same disease? Why are you different? And I began to realize that I had to accept the reality that I had this cancer. And my oncologist said to me, Father, at this point, you're 85% curable. This is something we can take care of. 18 or 19 years later, it's over with. No more cancer. But I remember I decided that I'm not going to cry and kick and carry. It's not going to change the reality. But I decided to laugh and always put on a happy face. Now, that doesn't mean that there were not days that I felt bad, but I didn't allow people to see that. As I always say, if you don't laugh, you cry. If you cry, they win. They win. And I said, I may cry, but I'm going to be by myself. This way, they don't know that. And I'm the type of person, like Viktor Frankl said, if we understand the why, we can deal with the how. If we understand why we have this situation, then how we're going to deal with it becomes much easier. And I always wanted to know why. Why, again, why me? Why me? After I had gone through all my treatments and stuff like that, I went back to my work, and I was sitting in my office, and I had knocked on the door, and a friend of mine who was a social worker came in and said, Howell, it's so good to have you back. Can I talk to you? I said, sure, that's it. I said, what's up, Kel? And she said to me, I know what you went through. You had cancer and all that stuff, but you always had a smile on your face. I said, because that was my decision. And I told her what I had just told you. And she said, I needed to hear that. She said, because I've been diagnosed with breast cancer. That week, 3 people came to me who had been diagnosed with cancer and asked me how I was able to do it with a smile. And I said, that's the why. That's the why. God sometimes has to give us suffering so that when we overcome suffering, we can help a brother or a sister overcome their own suffering. And this is what I always believe. God puts you where God needs you to be the person that a brother or sister needs to hear, to lean on, to understand, or to. And if we take anything away from this morning and bring it home with us, what God said to Moses in the reading this morning, what God said through Jeremiah the prophet and Micah and all the rest of the prophets, you are my people, and I will be your God. That's the covenant. Wilson, he was the co-founder of AA, and he said, please, Lord, teach us to laugh again, but God, don't ever let us forget that we have cried. Amen.